It is quite fascinating to observe the significant change that is evidently taking place in the US cryptocurrency sector. But as I'll be discussing, we're also beginning to notice some significant barriers being placed in our path, which is somewhat impeding our progress. The major development, however, is that the XRP SEC issue is finally resolved. And mostly, the final phase of this was the SEC versus Ripple side. Since we are aware that XRP was cleared in 2023, the case is now formally, essentially over. We will discuss that, I guess. We will deal with it. So, let's get right to the first significant announcement that I truly want to discuss, which comes from Brian Armstrong. As a result, co-founder and CEO of Coinbase, we made significant strides this week toward US crypto legislation, with more to follow next week. Draft law on market structure was introduced and considered. Stablecoin legislation is still being brought to the floor by bipartisan efforts, and a second vote is probably in the works for early next week Crypto Day, which is scheduled for next week at 5:14, and the arrival of over 60 crypto innovators in Washington, D.C. Advocates will continue to pound this drum. One thing is certain. Both sides are committed to giving crypto clear roles and making it right. After years of marginalization, both sides are taking the initiative and talking about it. Crypto isn't just at the table. It's at the top of the agenda, and yes, there has been a significant shift in the momentum with crypto. For those of you who are unaware, we have the major update, which is the Genius Act. However, we still need to see some more work done since we are beginning to see more delays and development has kind of stalled here, which is a major problem. As a result, the Genius Act was not approved by the Senate. The measure would have established the first stablecoin regulations in U.S. history if it had been approved. Now, I do believe that this is actually sort of adhering to the previous plan, which was that we would have things finished by August. This isn't particularly important in my opinion. The timing, in my opinion, is August. Therefore, even though it did fail and was delayed, I don't think that should be a cause for alarm. The United States will enact stablecoin legislation. We are aware that this will receive a lot of attention, not only from the regulators but also from Scott Bent, the full-on presidential administration, even if Trump has been discussing stablecoins. Although it's absurd that Trump already has his own stablecoin, stablecoins are becoming increasingly important for the U.S. to use as a financial tool and to support the dollar. Therefore, when we consider this, I believe that it is simply one speed bump in the road that we will eventually overcome before resuming our overdrive mode. Therefore, even though this failed, as I mentioned, there is no reason for alarm. Here, Senate Republicans did provide us with an update. The Genius Act was just defeated by Senate Democrats and Chuck Schumer. The U.S. dollar would gain strength thanks to this historic bipartisan bill. As previously said, the dollar and the benefits these stablecoins offer to it, namely increased financial freedom for Americans, are the main focus. Instead of acting in America's best interests, Democrats would choose to play politics. We also received an update. I apologize. That was the incorrect one. I assumed I had it open, but let me quickly grab it. A single second. You guys have it right here. I apologize. This was the other post from the banking GOP that I wanted to mention. After months of discussions with experts and stakeholders, the Genius Act was enacted by the banking GOP with 5 Democratic votes, protecting consumers and enhancing national security. Politics, not policy, was the focus of today's vote. And since this act goes beyond simply promoting stable coins, this video sort of explains just how significant it is altogether. It is promoting the US dollar and the US financial system standing as a leader in both the digital and traditional financial systems. Take a look. At the Banking Committee, the Genius Act was a bipartisan accomplishment. We took the time to appreciate the many hours you spent there, so it was a bipartisan accomplishment. Before the hearing, Mr. President, we spent weeks and months debating every day. During this session, we presented around 80 amendments to the Banking Committee. 40 amendments were put to a vote by the Banking Committee. We decided to make the American people's economy safer and more affordable. But what did we notice while the cameras were observing and the lights came on? The same Democratic colleagues who understood the pressing necessity to include stable coins into the transparent, accountable regulatory framework were present. We saw them reversing course and voting against the bill they personally drafted. What was altered? What was altered? Mr. President, what became different? Not the content. Over the final 5 revisions of the legislation, they were able to get more of what they desired. Politics, Mr. President, is what changed. Not the law, not the policy, and not the content. Politics. You guys have it there? Yes. Well, listen, I don't understand why this, didn't just get through in the end. Although it is somewhat absurd, as I previously stated, I believe this will be resolved before the end of the summer. It kind of fits with the first time frame that not just Trump released, but we also heard from Scott Bent and David Sachs about it. We should have stable coin laws by the end of the summer, which should allow the U.S. to have a stable coin market. Let's now discuss the major one, which is the announcement by the SEC government of a settlement with Chris Larison, Brad Garlinghouse, and Ripple. The parties have decided that Ripple will reimburse the remaining $125 million of the first penalty, with the remaining $50 million going to Ripple. Both parties will withdraw their appeals if the court decides to lift the injunction against Ripple. If we can get this resolved by the end of the month, which I believe will be pretty much updated by then, that's definitely something to look forward to. We also have James K. here discussing the SEC versus Ripple XRP breaking. The letter of settlement agreement has been filed by the SEC government. These are the next steps that we're looking at, he stated. Judge Torres must thus give an indication of whether the court would lift the injunction and release the escrow, with $50 million going to the SEC and the remaining amount returning to Ripple. Second, the SEC and Ripple will request a limited remand back to Judge Torres in order to request the above-mentioned remedy if Judge Torres issues the indicated ruling. 3. The SEC and Ripple will petition Judge Torres for the aforementioned remedy after the remand is granted. 4. It will end when the injunction is lifted and the money is dispersed to the SEC and Ripple. They will then petition the Court of Appeals to reject both the SEC's appeal and Ripple's cross-appeal. All right, let's be honest for the moment. This case is finished. Okay, it's finished. However, the issue here is that the legality procedure is still ongoing overall. We still have to endure all of this bullshit. However, none of this is really preventing Ripple from entering into any meaningful agreements with institutional entities, forming alliances, or even expanding within the U.S. I don't believe that anyone is very concerned about this matter at this time. This announcement, in my opinion, is a clear indication that the matter is virtually over. Since I'm not a lawyer, I'm more interested in the lawyer's side of things and rely on what they tell us. Thus, we also received an update from Fred Rowley. I'm not a lawyer. The settlement agreement that is attached has zero appearance by a certain Mr. Tenero, which is what makes this so fantastic. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing the man's name right. I am aware that we had already heard from him. To be fair, though, he has been battling a significant issue with temperature control in the IT area. You cannot simply ignore that. So, listen, this is something that we're clearly looking at in relation to, like, these other attorneys that participated in the process or well-known individuals who did so. Given the current state of this issue, I don't believe we will have to wait very long for everything to be resolved. Even Johnny Dion acknowledged that